Welcome to Fear and Greed, the week ahead. I'm Sean Aylmer, and as always, I'm joined by economist Stephen Koukoulas. You'll find him at thekook.com and on Twitter using the handle thekook. Stephen, good morning.
Very good morning to you, Sean.
What a week we've just had.
Last week was huge, and obviously the highlight was the Reserve Bank of Australia leaving rates on hold. It was, as we discussed last week, a sort of a 50-50 probability. There were some very good people in the markets calling a hike, some calling steady. And when you read this statement from the RBA governor, it was reasonably finely balanced. But, and this is the critical thing, the RBA did acknowledge that growth is slowing. I think that's apparent to everyone looking at the data. There is a risk that the unemployment rate will increase reasonably steadily over the course of the next 6 to 12 months. And inflation is falling. And while it's still too high, it's at least moving in the right direction.
What about the data that came out last week? Does that support what the Reserve Bank was saying?
There was mixed news. We had the building approvals numbers, and they were up 20%. So we had this really strong lift, but that was really only in apartments in New South Wales. So when you dig into the data, it's probably one or two high-rise developments that got approved. That's good news. Of course, there's still dwellings for people to live in, but nonetheless, you just want to see a bit more consolidation, a bit more breadth in the numbers before you can be confident that we're going to be getting a housing construction rebound. On house prices, we had confirmation that house prices are going up. So the CoreLogic and the PropTrack data, by the way, both confirmed that house prices have been increasing for the last 4 to 5 months. Not booming, but trending higher as well. And so the picture for the economy is one where, we're still muddling along. Growth is slower, but I think all eyes will be really towards the end of this month and next month when we get the next round of labour force inflation numbers. They're the thing that Reserve Bank are going to be focusing on.
Okay, now we're going to hear from the Reserve Bank Governor, Phil Lowe. The guessing game, we'll talk monetary policy in a moment. Stephen, just park that. Does he want the job?
I think he wants it, but all of the media speculation that's been out in the last week or so has been listing other candidates to replace him as governor in September. His term comes up in the middle of September. He's been there for 7 years. He was deputy governor for 5 years before that. So he's been in the sort of upper echelons and on the RBA board for well over a decade now. And I think as part of the Reserve Bank review, we've got to remember that there is this review of the bank too that's going to be implemented by the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers. It's not just the personalities of the governor and deputy governor necessarily. It's also the revamping of a monetary policy board as opposed to an administrative board. So I dare say that's a long, convoluted way of saying that I think we are going to be getting a new governor, and it could be announced very, very shortly.
Okay, so he's talking this week, Phil Lowe, so presumably he'll give us more information on monetary policy and the state of the economy?
Indeed, well, the topic is monetary policy and indeed the review of the Reserve Bank. So, yes, and he'll be able to put a bit more flesh on the bones of why they held rates steady at the board meeting last week. And as we said, I think he's going to be acknowledging a few things that inflation's still high. It's still on their figuring some way from the 2 to 3% target band. And other central banks have got cash rates, at 5% or even a little above that. So we're at 4.1%. So he may be sort of grilled or quizzed on why our rates are below those of, the US, New Zealand, UK, for example. There's just a sort of a snapshot of other things. But he'll also be talking about, the outlook for jobs, the outlook for unemployment, the outlook for, just how the momentum on the economy is going.
Okay, what else is out this week?
It's all about sentiment and confidence. They're the only other key economic data releases. We've got the Westpac consumer sentiment numbers. Consumer sentiment is really bad. We're in the doldrums. Maybe there'll be a little bit of a bounce because of the rates on hold decision. So always watch the consumer sentiment numbers because they are a pretty good leading indicator on consumer spending. And of course, with weak consumer sentiment, we have had weak retail spending. So the correlation's been holding, which is always good for us economists trying to forecast these things. The other, arguably more important indicator will be the NAB Business Confidence Survey. Confidence has come off the boil, but it's still way above what consumers are thinking. So we'll be looking at the NAB survey for clues on softer growth. There's also a range of questions about employment intentions, profitability, what's happening to selling prices and these sorts of things. So there'll be a myriad of news in the NAB survey to sort of work out just how the business sector's going.
Okay, now before I leave, there was a great story last week, and I thought of you immediately. So Gina Cass-Gottlieb is the head of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, and she talked about a conundrum for competition regulators. And what it was the report on childcare fees. And she said where there's more competition in the cities, prices are higher. And she actually said it's quite a conundrum for we competition regulators. I thought it was a great quote. And explain that one to me, Stephen.
Sean, I don't know if I can. There are a few anomalies in economics, and it could just be simply because there's such hot demand for childcare, and because people are now seeing some government subsidies coming through on childcare. Let's get our kids into childcare. So in a funny way, you actually boost demand as prices go up. There's another way of looking at it. There's a thing called a Giffen good in economics, which is...
Oh, my God, I'm back in macro one.
Yeah, the more expensive they are, the more desirable they are. So it's a bit like, I've got a Louis Vuitton handbag versus a Big W-owned brand one. They're obviously $50 versus $5,000, but people will want the expensive one for status and all these other things. So the more expensive it is, the hotter the demand. Go figure that one out.
I don't know. Gina Cass-Gottlieb did also mention about capacity to pay and things like that. But you've got to be a pretty smart operator to understand. I mean, I suppose if you're sitting in the middle of Toorak, you understand that people there are going to pay more than if you're in Whoop Whoop.
Correct. And, of course, that's where the densely populated parts of the population is, in the big cities. And there has been, and probably still is, a scarcity of childcare places. And, well, dare I say it, one of the things that happened during the pandemic is that we had more babies produced. Now they're being born and they're growing up and going into childcare. So in a sense, we've had a bit of a, not just immigration that's boosting population, it's a bit of natural increase too. And well, by definition, that adds to demand for childcare.
Indeed. Stephen, have a great week.
Thank you, Sean.
That was economist Stephen Koukoulas, better known as The Kook. You can find him at thekook.com and follow him on Twitter using the handle The Kook. I'm Sean Aylmer, and this is Fear and Greed, the week ahead.